Hello, folks, and welcome back. We are here for the next chapter, chapter 8 of Carmilla. So we are just chugging right along with this story. So I hope you've been enjoying so far. Before we get going into the story itself, just the usual warning that this is, and just on my channel in general, I read a lot of antique, I guess we could call them, stories, which means they often contain things in them about race, religion, gender, orientation, what have you, that is distasteful to modern people. And if that sounds like it's maybe not going to be quite your thing, you are more than welcome to swim off somewhere else on the internet and find something that's a little more in line with what you're looking for. And the second warning that I usually give is that given that I read a lot of creepy stories, spooky stuff, of course, the events that give rise to spooky tales of the macabre tend to be sometimes difficult things, murders, suicides, that kind of stuff. So again, if that's not your cup of tea, feel free to go find a different one. And yeah, you're not obligated to hang out with me here. But if that does sound like something that you're interested, and if you're interested in, and if you are here for the next part of Carmilla, you're in the right place. So as usual, we're going to dive into it, and I apologize in advance for any misspeaking, mispronunciation, anytime I have to reread something because my mouth and my brain aren't quite on the same page. I apologize in advance. We are on chapter, what did I say? Chapter 8. Chapter 8. I'm looking right at it. Like, it's chapter 8 of Carmilla. So thank you for joining me once again, and let's get into the story. So, and I can never figure out how I want to hold the book with where my microphone is. Let's try this way this time. Chapter 8, Search. At sight of the room, perfectly undisturbed except for our violent entrance, we began to cool a little and soon recovered our senses sufficiently to dismiss the men. It had struck Mademoiselle that possibly Carmilla had been wakened by the uproar at her door, and in her first panic had jumped from her bed and hid herself in a press or behind a curtain from which she could not, of course, emerge until the major domo and his, oh my goodness, and his myrmidons, until the head male servant and his minions had withdrawn. Quite rightly, if she's just in her nightgown, she would not want to be seen by the opposite gender. That would have been very poor form in the time period that this was written. We now recommenced our search and began to call her name again. It was all to no purpose. Our perplexity and agitation increased. We examined the windows, but they were secured. I implored of Carmilla, if she had concealed herself, to play this cruel trick no longer, to come out and to end our anxieties. It was all useless. I was by this time convinced that she was not in the room, nor in the dressing room, the door of which was still locked on the inside. On this side, rather. She could not have passed it. I was utterly puzzled. Had Carmilla discovered one of those secret passages which the old housekeeper said were known to exist in the Schloss, although the tradition of their exact situation had been lost? A little time would, no doubt, explain all, utterly perplexed as, for the present, we were. It was past 4 o'clock, and I preferred passing the remaining hours of darkness in Madame's room. Daylight brought no solution of the difficulty. The whole household, with my father at its head, was in a state of agitation next morning. Every part of the chateau was searched. The grounds were explored. No trace of the missing lady could be discovered. The stream was about to be dragged when my father was in distraction. I mean, I guess he would be. He thinks he's lost this teenage girl. What a tale I have to tell the poor girl's mother on her return. Yeah, that too. I, too, was almost beside myself. though my grief was quite of a different kind. The morning was passed in alarm and excitement. It was now 1 o'clock, and still no tidings. I ran up to Carmilla's room and found her standing at her dressing table. I was astounded. I could not believe my eyes. She beckoned me to her with her pretty finger in silence. Her face expressed extreme fear. I ran to her in ecstasy of joy. I kissed and embraced her again and again. I ran to the bell and rang it vehemently to bring others to the spot who might at once relieve my father's anxiety. "Dear Carmilla, what has become of you all this time? We have been in agonies of anxiety about you," I exclaimed. "Where have you been? How did you come back?" "Last night has been a night of wonders," she said. "Yeah, I bet. For mercy's sake, explain all you can." "It was past 2 last night," she said, "when I went to sleep as usual in my bed with my doors locked, that of the dressing room and that opening upon the gallery. My sleep was uninterrupted and, so far as I know, dreamless. But I woke just now on the sofa in the dressing room there, and I found the door between the rooms open and the other door forced. How could all of this have happened without my being wakened? It must have been accompanied with a great deal of noise, and I am particularly easy wakened. And how could I have been carried out of my bed without my sleep having been interrupted? I, whom the slightest stir startles." By this time, Mademoiselle, my father, and a number of the servants were in the room. Carmilla was, of course, overwhelmed with inquiries, congratulations, and welcomes. She had but one story to tell, and seemed the least of all able to suggest any way of accounting for what had happened. My father took a turn and up and down the room, thinking. Sorry, let me try that sentence again. My father took a turn up and down the room, thinking. I saw Carmilla's eyes follow him for a moment with a sly, dark glance. When my father had sent the servants away, Mademoiselle, having gone in search of a little bottle of valerian and sal volatile, don't know what that is, and there being no one now in the room with Carmilla except my father, Madame, and myself, he came to her thoughtfully, took her hand very kindly, led her to the sofa, and sat down beside her. "Will you forgive me, my dear, if I risk a conjecture and ask a question?" "Who can have a better right?" she said. "Ask what you please, and I will tell you everything, but my story is simply one of bewilderment and darkness. I know absolutely nothing. Put any questions you please, but you know, of course, the limitations Mamma has placed me under." "Perfectly, my dear child. I need not approach the topics on which she desires our silence. Now, the marvel of last night consists in you having been removed from your bed and your room without being wakened, and this removal having occurred apparently while the windows were still secured and the 2 doors locked upon the inside. I will tell you my theory and ask you a question." Carmilla was leaning on her hand dejectedly. Madame and I were listening breathlessly. "Now, my question is, have you ever been suspected of walking in your sleep?" Which is probably the same question any of us would come up with under the circumstances. "Never, since I was very young indeed. But you did walk in your sleep when you were young?" "Yes, I know I did. I have been told so often by my old nurse." My father smiled and nodded. "Well, what has happened is this. You got up in your sleep, unlocked the door, not leaving the key as usual in the lock, but took it out, and locking it on the outside, you again took the key out and carried it away with you to some one of the 25 rooms on this floor, or perhaps upstairs or downstairs. There are so many rooms and closets, so much heavy furniture, and such accumulations of lumber that it would require a week to search this old house thoroughly. Do you see now what I mean?" "I do, but not all," she answered. "And how, Papa, do you account for her finding herself on the sofa in the dressing room, which we searched so carefully?" She came there after you had searched it, still in her sleep, and at last awoke spontaneously, and was as much surprised to find herself where she was as anyone else. I wish all mysteries were as easily and innocently explained as yours, Carmilla, he said, laughing. And so we may congratulate ourselves on the certainty that the most natural explanation of the occurrence is one that involves no drugging, no tampering with locks, no burglars or poisoners or witches, nothing that need alarm Carmilla or anyone else for our safety. Carmilla was looking charmingly. Nothing could be more beautiful than her tints. Her beauty was, I think, enhanced by that graceful languor that was peculiar to her. I think my father was silently contrasting her looks with mine, for he said, I wish my poor Laura was looking more like herself, and he sighed. So our alarms were happily ended, and Carmilla restored to her friends. And that is chapter 8. So it's quite a short one. So I think maybe we'll just carry right on through chapter 9. But I guess sleepwalking would be the explanation you would go to under the circumstances. He's right in that it really seems like, sorry, my bangs are growing out and they're starting to bother me. It certainly seems like the best explanation that would suit the circumstances for sure. So, considering the shortness of chapter 8, we are going to carry right on through to chapter 9, which is called The Doctor. As Carmilla would not hear of an attendant sleeping in her room, I mean, I wouldn't either. That's weird. That would, I mean, like, it's not weird for a lot of people, but it would weird me out. Thought I could hear someone in the hallway. Oh, whatever. My father... Oh my God, they're kind of loud. All right, let's start that again. As Carmilla would not hear of an attendant sleeping in her room, and like I was saying, that would be... I know some people are fine with, I mean, I guess if it was someone I knew, it would be okay. But it's like someone just being in your room to like watch you would weird me out, I think. My father arranged that a servant should sleep outside her door so that she would not attempt to make another such excursion without being arrested at her own door. That's very practical, actually. That night passed quietly, and next morning, early, the doctor, whom my father had sent for without telling me a word about it, arrived to see me. Madame accompanied me to the library, and there the grave little doctor with white hair and spectacles, whom I mentioned before, was waiting to receive me. I told him my story, and as I proceeded, he grew graver and graver. We were standing, he and I, in the recess of one of the windows, facing one another. When my statement was over, he leaned with his shoulders against the wall, and with his eyes fixed on me earnestly, with an interest in which was a dash of horror. After a minute's reflection, he asked Madame if he could see my father. He was sent for accordingly, and as he entered smiling, he said, I dare say, doctor, you are going to tell me that I am an old fool for having brought you here. I hope I am. But his smile faded into shadow as the doctor, with a very grave face, beckoned him to him. He and the doctor talked for some time in the same recess where I had just conferred with the physician. It seemed an earnest and argumentative conversation. I mean, God forbid the teenage girl be privy to her own medical diagnosis or conversations surrounding it. It's fine, she's not a person. The room is very large, and I and Madame stood together, burning with curiosity at the farther end. Not a word could we hear, however, for they spoke in a very low tone. I mean, she's a teenager, she's not a child. She can be involved in her own medical treatment, thank you. And the deep recess of the window quite concealed the doctor from view, and very nearly my father, whose foot, arm, and shoulder only could we see, and the voices were, I suppose, all the less audible for the sort of closet which the thick wall and window formed. After a time, my father's face looked into the room. It was pale, thoughtful, and I fancied agitated. Laura, dear, come here for a moment. Madame, we shan't trouble you, the doctor says, at present. Accordingly, I approached, for the first time a little alarmed, for although I felt very weak, I did not feel ill. And strength, one always fancies, is a thing that may be picked up when we please. My father held out his hand to me as I drew near, but he was looking at the doctor, and he said, "It certainly is very odd. I don't understand it quite. Laura, come here. Come here, dear, now. Attend to Dr. Spelsberg. Spelsberg. I'm going to say Spelsberg. And recollect yourself. You mentioned a sensation like that of two needles piercing the skin somewhere about your neck on the night when you experienced your first horrible dream. Is there still any soreness?" "None at all," I answered. "Can you indicate with your finger about the point at which you think this occurred?" "Very little below my throat. Here," I answered. I wore a morning dress which covered the place I pointed to. "Now you can satisfy yourself," said the doctor. You won't mind your papa's lowering your dress a very little. It is necessary to detect a symptom of the complaint under which you have been suffering." This whole interaction is just gross to me. I don't like it. I acquiesced. It was only an inch or two below the edge of my collar. "God bless me, so it is," exclaimed my father, growing pale. "You see it now with your own eyes," said the doctor with a gloomy triumph. "What is it?" I exclaimed, beginning to be frightened. "Nothing, my dear young lady, but a small blue spot about the size of the tip of your little finger. And now," he continued, turning to my papa, "the question is, what is best to be done?" "Is there any danger?" I urged in great trepidation. "Yeah, tell her what the fuck's going on, you dickheads." You're scaring her. Like, it's her body. Tell her what's happening. Include her. She should be part of this conversation. "I trust not, my dear," answered the doctor. "I don't see why you should not recover. I don't see why you should not begin immediately to get better. That is the point at which the sense of strangulation begins." "That is the point at which the sense of strangulation begins?" "Yes," I answered. "And recollect, as well as you can, the same point was a kind of center of that thrill which you described just now, like the current of a cold stream running against you." "It may have been. I think it was." "Ah, you see," he added, turning to my father. "Shall I say a word to Madame?" "Certainly," said my father. He called Madame to him and said, "I find my young friend here far from well. It won't be of any great consequence, I hope, but it will be necessary that some steps be taken, which I will explain by and by. But in the meantime, Madame, you will be so good as to not let Miss Laura be alone for one moment. This is the only direction I need give for the present. It is indispensable." We may rely upon your kindness, Madame, I know," added my father. Madame satisfied him eagerly. "And you, dear Laura, I know you will observe the doctor's direction. I shall have to ask your opinion upon another patient whose symptoms slightly resemble those of my daughter, that have just been detailed to you, very much milder in degree, but I believe quite of the same sort. She is a young lady, our guest, but as you say you will be passing this way again this evening, you can't do better than to take your supper here, and then you can see her. She does not come down till the afternoon." "I thank you," said the doctor. "I shall be with you then at about 7 this evening." And then they repeated their directions to me and to Madame, and with this parting charge my father left us and walked out with the doctor, and I saw them pacing together up and down between the road and the moat, on the grassy platform in front of the castle, evidently absorbed in earnest conversation. The doctor did not return. I saw him mount his horse there, take his leave, and ride away eastward through the forest. Nearly at the time I saw the man arrive from Dranfield with the letters, and dismount and hand the bag to my father. In the meantime, Madame and I were both busy, lost in conjecture as to the reasons of the singular and earnest direction which the doctor and my father had concurred in opposing. Madame, as she afterwards told me, was afraid that the doctor apprehended a sudden seizure, and that without prompt assistance I might either lose my life in a fit or at the least be seriously hurt. That's actually a very practical, a very sensible conclusion that Madame has drawn there. I mean, we know the nature of the story, and I'm sure we can all guess as to why the doctor has given that direction. But if you didn't know, I mean, Madame's thoughts are pretty practical, I think. The interpretation did not strike me, and I fancied, perhaps luckily for my nerves, that the arrangement was prescribed simply to secure a companion who would prevent my taking too much exercise, or eating unripe fruit, or doing any of the 50 foolish things to which young people are supposed to be prone. Oh, I'm sure we all remember that. About half an hour after my father came in, he had a letter in his hand, and it said, "This letter has been delayed. It is from General Spelsdorf. He might have been here yesterday. He may not come till tomorrow, or he may be here today." I mean, nothing like specifics. I know it's just the nature of travel in the time period, but it's just really funny to me the way he sent that message. He put the open letter into my hand, but he did not look pleased, as he used to when a guest, especially one so much loved as the general, was coming. On the contrary, he looked as if he wished him at the bottom of the Red Sea. There was plainly something on his mind which he did not choose to divulge. "Papa, darling, will you tell me this?" said I suddenly, laying my hand on his arm and looking, I am sure, imploringly in his face. "Perhaps," he answered, smoothing my hair caressingly over my eyes. "Does the doctor think me very ill?" "No, dear, he thinks if the right steps are taken, you will be quite well again, at least, on the high road to a complete recovery in a day or two," he answered a little dryly. I mean, you could just tell her what's going on. Like, that's an option as well. "I wish our good friend, the General, had chosen any other time. That is, I wish you had been perfectly well to receive him." I mean, she's just a little weak. You don't have to lock her in a room or something. If your buddy's coming to stay, like, I don't see, if your daughter's not actually that seriously ill, why does it matter? "But do tell me, Papa," I insisted. "What does he think is the matter with me?" "Thank you, Laura. Doing a little bit of self-advocacy here. Yes, thank you." "Nothing. You must not plague me with questions," he answered with more irritation than I ever remember him to have displayed before. Asshole. And seeing that I looked wounded, I suppose, he kissed me and added, "You shall know all about it in a day or two. That is, all that I know. In the meantime, you are not to trouble your head about it." What a patronizing asshole. Just ugh. Ugh. This whole interaction I do not care for. And I mean, I know you can say that it's just the way things worked at the time and blah 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 blah, but it's still just it still just doesn't sit well with me, I guess is how I describe it. And you are allowed to think that about things that were written in the past. The fact that they were written a long time ago might be an explanation for something, but it doesn't mean you aren't allowed to have feelings about it. He turned and left the room, but came back before I had done wondering and puzzling over the oddity of all of this. It was merely to say that he was going to Kernstein. I'm going to say that's pronounced Kernstein. And had ordered the carriage to be ready at 12, and that I and Madame should accompany him. He was going to see the priest who lived near those picturesque grounds upon business, and as Carmilla had never seen them, she could follow when she came down with Mademoiselle, who would bring materials for what you call a picnic, which might be laid for us at the ruined castle. That actually sounds nice. At 12 o'clock, accordingly, I was ready, and not long after, my father, Madame, and I set out upon our projected drive. Passing the drawbridge, we turned to the right and follow the road up over the steep Gothic bridge westward to reach the deserted village and ruined castle of Kernstein. No sylvan drive can be fancied prettier. The ground breaks into gentle hills and follows, all clothed with beautiful wood, totally destitute of the comparative formality which artificial planting and early culture and pruning impart. The irregularities of the ground often lead the road out of its course and cause it to wind beautifully round the sides of broken hollows and the steeper sides of the hills among the varieties of ground almost inexhaustible. Turning one of these points, we suddenly encountered our old friend, the general, riding towards us, attended by a mounted servant. His portmanteaus were following in a hired wagon, such as we term a cart. The general dismounted as we pulled up, and, after the usual greetings, was easily persuaded to accept the vacant seat in the carriage, and sent his horse on with his servant to the Schloss. And that is chapter 9 of Carmilla, and I think we will leave it there. We don't have too much of this story left, so I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for choosing to spend some time with me today on my channel, and I hope that until we can meet up again, that you, pardon me, itchy nose, that you and your loved ones are safe and well, and I hope to see you here again soon for the next chapter of Carmilla. Bye, folks.